Prepare anything, but just to set some of the context, I know the incident happened on Saturday, August the 3rd. So that very day, our foundation, El Paso Community Foundation, and Paso del Norte Community Foundation, we immediately set up funds, understanding that what happens in these cases is many people want help in one way or another. And then on Monday morning, we decided to organize a big meeting with various stakeholders. And already on Monday, the National Compassion Fund had reached out to us because this is so new for us in our community. Who would have thought that there are people who actually develop some type of expertise and procedures and know-how in helping communities respond to this.
So this is Jeff?
Yeah, this is...
Jeff. I didn't realize that was sorry.
Yeah, and this is Jeff Diane, who's the Executive Director of the National Compassion Fund, and this event coincided with his visit with our task force tomorrow, I believe. And so we're kind of in action and moving along very well. The other thing that we did very quickly was decide that both of our foundations need to work in a very coordinated way. It's great that we both put out the baskets, so to speak, electronically and received donations and commitments that are about $5 million right now. And then decided to create something that's in process called One Fund El Paso. And decided we needed to have a One Fund El Paso coordinator. And so very quickly decided to contract also with Stephanie Carr. And she's the sort of the relief funds coordinator. And massive coordination that I'm also here to help Stephanie assist with, as our folks from Paso del Norte Community Foundation. So, Stephanie, do you want to say anything else about this?
Well, I would, thank you, Sanjay. I would just add that there's a very concerted effort of both foundations to put these funds into what's going to be called One Fund El Paso. The mechanism for doing that is already in place. So the assurance to the community is that 100% of the dollars that have been donated to either of the victim relief funds is going to go directly to the families. All of the administrative costs, the credit card fees, all of those other costs are being fully absorbed by the foundations, so that we keep emphasizing to the community that 100% of these funds will go to victims and their families. We'll hear from Jeff, our process that we're putting in place to do that. But as you probably have heard, and as have I, we've raised $16 million, and $300,000 is being spent on administrative fees, and we're doing a bricks and mortar building and all kinds of things that are, in fact, not true. So the fact of the matter is, once again, that 100% of the dollars that folks have donated to either foundation will go directly to victims and their families. So that's our commitment.
Going to be a brick and mortar resiliency center that they were waiting on from the fire department or something?
Yes, so there will be what is going to be called a family resiliency center. There is a process in place. We've been working with the city on that. That is separate from the victim relief fund.
Okay.
There will be a building that will be leased, and so the city is working in conjunction with One Fund El Paso to do that. But again, none of those victim relief dollars are going to be used to support that family resiliency center. It will operate much like the Family Assistance Center did that was at the Civic Center those 2 weeks with representatives from TRALA and the District Attorney's Office and Red Cross and a variety of resources for families will be co-located at that facility. Any other questions?
Yes. Sure, just general questions about the application process. Is there a deadline, and what kind of vetting tools are you using for the victims?
And I think Jeff will address
Yeah, I
that.
think probably a good idea for him to speak a little bit about that. One other thing I'll just say, so we did realize there was a need for some immediate assistance that families had. So we understood that typically about $5,000 or so could be given out just to help people with that immediate form of assistance before they go through an application process that's designed to be very fair and equitable and transparent. Hence the gift cards. That's how we decided to approach that for right now, and because it will take just a little bit of time to apply for the other amounts. So I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Sanjay. My name's Jeff Dion. I'm the Executive Director of the National Compassion Fund, and I'm really sorry that I have to be here. But I'm really glad that all of you are here. I've spent over 25 years working in victim services and working with the economic losses and compensation that victims get, even going back to 9/11. And after the Aurora theater shooting, some of those survivors came to us at the National Center for Victims of Crime and said, we want you to start, we don't like how our fund's being run, we want you to set up a different fund for us. And I thought, well, rather than set up a fund just for you, what if we put an infrastructure in place so when one of these events occurs, we can flip a switch, we can start accepting money from the general public, and we can make sure that 100% of it goes to the victims of that event. And so it took us about 1.5 years to run the traps and build that infrastructure, and then we just waited for the day that we didn't want to have happen, but we knew it would. And it happened on April 2nd, 2014, with the second mass shooting at Fort Hood in Texas. And that was our beta test. And sadly, since then, El Paso will be the 13th mass violence fund that we've administered over the last 5 years. I administered the relief fund for Las Vegas, we worked with Pulse, I did Stoneman Douglas, I did Santa Fe High School outside of Houston. And so the reason we're here is, as we go from community to community, we see people going through the same learning curve. And we just wanted to come and share the benefit of our experience so you can know what works. And one of the things that I know is a lot of the people that are going to get help and benefits from this fund are going to need some legal assistance to manage that. We pride ourselves on being collaborative and working with other existing benefits and programs. That's why whenever we do this in other states, we know that we don't want to base our benefits on any economic loss, because that will be considered a collateral source in most states and will work against people's crime victim compensation benefits. Here in Texas, you saw the collateral benefits that have to pay out first. Charitable donations wasn't one of them. So in Texas, charitable donations won't count against crime victim compensation benefits, but it could count against other stuff. And so we always like to deal with individual families, tell us your whole story so we can understand what your situation is and we can identify what to do to help you. We're going to give people in similar situations the same level of money, but we want to understand how it's going to impact them so that we can make sure they get legal counsel to take care of certain things. So it's a public and transparent process. So what we're doing right now is just collecting information on interested people. So you can go to the National Compassion Fund website and enter your information. If you are going to be working with any of these victims, please enter your own information so you can get updates on the fund. If it's a victim, if it's a surviving family member, if it's a donor, if it's a concerned citizen, everybody that wants to know about this should put their information in there. Law enforcement cannot give us a list of victims, but when we go through our validation process, we can ask them, was John Smith a victim of this event? And they will tell us yes or no. And so that's how we work with them to validate. So everybody should get on that list, because first thing we're going to do, the community foundations have appointed a task force, and they're the ones who are going to set policy. We help administer and implement, but they set policies, because the policies need to be informed by local community values and community experience. And so the first thing we're going to do is that task force will publish a draft set of protocols saying this is our suggestion about the rules that should govern the distribution of these funds. And then it's going to be open for public comment. So if you are representing a client and you sign up on that contact form, you're going to get a copy of those draft protocols. So you can look at that and see, how is this going to impact my client? And then you can offer public comment. and say, and people can say, this is great. They can say, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Or they can say, well, I think this is pretty good, but in this part, instead of X, you should do Y. There will be a public town hall meeting at the end of the public comment period where we will explain the draft protocol. People can ask questions. People can share their story. People can give their public feedback and comment on the draft protocol. And after that, then the committee will finalize their protocol. Once the committee finalizes its protocol, we create an electronic application form. And in that application form, there will be separate applications for death benefits, physical injuries, and I think possibly, based on what we've done in the past, we've got to see what the task force says, people who have experienced psychological trauma. If someone is, and we say it's an application, it's for lack of a better term. We're not sitting in judgment, is this person worthy? We're just trying to collect information and validate folks and make sure we're dealing with the right people. And so some of the things that we might need help with, sometimes when there's a death case, there are competing applications for death benefits. One person dies, we're going to pay one application. If a spouse and a surviving child file competing applications, then to determine who's the right person to deal with, we're going to look to who is the personal representative of that estate. Now sometimes we're going to talk to those folks. Sometimes it's going to be a spouse and grandparents because they want to make sure these kids are taken care of. And so if we say, you know, the spouse is really the appropriate person to file this, the grandparents will often say, well, that's okay, I just want to make sure they were covered. But sometimes there's a real conflict. And then we're going to look to who is the personal representative of the estate. If they have not opened an estate, they might need help doing that so that we can make sure someone is a personal representative and that's the right person to deal with. When we make pay benefits and death claims, this is charity, this is a gift. We could do whatever we wanted, but we look to the intestacy statute of the jurisdiction where the decedent was domiciled for guidance. And that is the general framework that we follow. Though there are a few little areas where we have discretion where we might deviate. But so generally, if there's a spouse, then the spouse is going to get everything. If there is no spouse but kids, then the kids will get it. If there are kids from a previous marriage, then there's going to be a split. And we look at all that stuff. When someone applies, we always ask, is there any potential beneficiary who receives some type of public benefit like Medicaid or SSI, so we can red flag it. It's not going to keep us from giving them benefits, but it means that we're going to want to make sure before we give out that benefit, we're going to connect them with an attorney, and that's where we're going to need your help, because what we've seen a lot is the use of special needs trusts for people. We had a survivor from the Aurora theater shooting who was a paraplegic. He was like 19 years old. He was 6'7", and his family didn't have any way to get around because he needed a wheelchair-accessible van, and they couldn't afford it. It was written about in the New York Times. Dave Matthews Band wanted to buy this kid a van. There's only one van that he would fit in because he was so tall. And, those vans are like $60,000 once they're all, and there's just like a prescription that it has to be set up the right way. He had a special needs trust. The van was owned, we got the van donated to the trust, owned by the trust paid for car insurance and things like that. And so we've had a lot of experience with knowing that that is something that can happen. And so we want to look at that because we don't want anybody to give up their benefits. We were not involved in the Boston Marathon bombing. There's a newspaper article about someone who lost their leg and they had a $250,000 check from the Boston One Fund sitting in their kitchen drawer, and they said, well, I can't cash it or I'm going to lose my state health insurance benefits, and these prosthetics are expensive. And I was like, that shouldn't have to happen. That's why we want to deal with victims holistically and help get them a special needs trust. There's a lot of children that are going to receive benefits. If a child was physically injured, they're going to be eligible for benefits. If a child had a parent who was killed, they could receive benefits as a legal heir. Whenever we give money to kids, we always make sure that we comply with the Texas Uniform Transfer to Minors Act. And so based on how much money they're getting, we want to make sure that if the money that goes to that child needs to be put into trust, then we do that. So, yes?
I'm sorry, Jeff. Just so that everyone knows, also in Community Foundation, a separate educational scholarship fund has been set up, and so different monies are going into that educational scholarship for the kids. Again, that's separate from the victim relief fund, so just so that you know that educational scholarship fund.
Thanks, Stephanie.
While I have the floor, I will
Yeah.
say, on this committee, just so that you know, in this room, is Stancy is on the local task force, so thanks to her. And Beto is from Chala, and our other attorney is Omar Vida, who's the chief legal officer at UMC. So I think we have a pretty good legal team. And task force is chaired by Ruben Vogt, our past county judge.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Stephanie brings up a good point. Whenever one of these horrific events happens, there are multiple legitimate needs that arise. There's individual victim needs, there's community needs. Some people might want to create scholarship funds, somebody might want to build a memorial, other people want to make sure there's a resiliency center. All of those needs are absolutely legitimate. What we tell the groups that we work with is, that's fine, we just have to be really transparent and tell people, if you want to give to victims' families, give here. If you want to give to a memorial, give here. If you want to give to a scholarship fund, give here. Because what we do is just one part of a continuum of care that includes crime victim compensation, immediate emergency assistance in the forms of these gift cards. Because for us to do it right, it takes a little bit of time. Since we are giving out 100% of the money, that means that there are two things that we need to know to divide up that money. One, how much money has been raised, and two, how many people have been validated in each of these categories. And so we make a recommendation. You want to hold the fund open for donations long enough to capture enough money to help all these people, but you also don't want to have it drag out too long to get them help when they need it. Businesses, corporations tend to give the most, but they take the longest to give. And so, sometimes they need to get through that fiscal quarter, and then they're going to do their accounting, and then they're going to make a donation. And so once the fund, when the committee, the task force, will decide on the date that the fund is going to be closed to donations, and after that, that happens roughly in the same time period that the application deadline is. But people, once we have final protocols, within about 2 weeks, the online application will open, and generally it's about a 30-day window for people to apply for benefits. And please know that if there are people that are, and since we are asking for information for people on the contact form, we are going to be affirmatively reaching out to families of the deceased and people that were wounded and hospitalized to make sure we get applications from everyone, that we answer their questions and walk them through that process. But there are going to, if they need help with probate, if they need help with setting up a minor trust, if they need help with a special needs trust, and sometimes the family will not reach agreement on how the funds are going to be distributed, and we should generally require a consent authorization from every legal heir that's like, I know this is a gift, I know I don't have any legal claim to this, but I understand and I accept that I'm getting this percentage of this gift, even if it's 0%. If people can't agree, and sometimes, like I said, we've got parents that have been divorced a long time and the child dies and mom says, he's not getting any of that money, never paid any child support, this stuff. We say, look, it's in your best interest to agree. If you can't agree, we're going to, you're going to have to go to probate and figure it out, all right? And so we really want to encourage people to come together, but they might need probate help if they've got family members that don't work together. We try to help, but we cannot manage all of these folks, dysfunctional family. We're not going to solve in 3 months what has been going on for 20 or 30 years. But we try and help, and so having your help and assistance and making sure that folks are protected, that kids are protected when they get benefits is going to be really absolutely critical. So thank you so much for your willingness to do this. And I'm happy to answer any questions about stuff. There's stuff we know, stuff we don't yet know, but we could say when we think we'll figure it out. Yes, we'll start with you.
So, I know we'll be the application process, and have you contemplated the pool of victims? I mean, we know that there's 46, I believe, but then there's, the tree of people who go out, and I mean, you can go endlessly. I mean, there's
Sure, that's right.
the entire city.
So what we have done, let me just talk about what we've done in the past, and because that's going to be a policy decision that the task force is going to make. But in every one that we've done, we've told the local steering committee or task force, you have to draw a circle on a map. And you have to say that people inside this circle are covered and people who are outside this circle are not covered. And there is no right or wrong answer. It is arbitrary, but it's just something that needs to be done. And that will be stated in the draft protocols. So for instance, at the Pulse nightclub, if you were in the nightclub or on its enclosed patio, you were covered. If you were in the parking lot or across the street, you weren't. And sometimes that was difficult because I had to talk to someone who had just left the club, was in the drive-thru across the street at Wendy's, which was taking forever that night, and heard the gunshots, and is getting texts from his friends who are still in the club. And his ex was killed, and he hung out for hours and shot video and talked to the FBI. And he suffered from horrible post-traumatic stress and couldn't work for 4 months. And I had to tell him, I'm sorry, but you're not covered under this program, and had to direct him to other things that might be available. And so every event, unfortunately, is unique, and we've got to try and figure that out about what works here. There are 3 principal things that we always look to in trying to make those decisions. 1, is it the right thing to do? 2, is it fair? And 3, can we practically pull it off? So for example, at Stoneman Douglas, people thought, oh, we should pay psychological trauma benefits just to the kids that were in the rooms where someone was shot. Well, that seems like the right thing to do, and that seems fair, but we couldn't practically pull it off. Because they pulled the fire alarm, and kids were filing out of the building, and when the gunshots were going off, and they were being pulled into any available room. So we didn't know who was in what room. But what we did know was who was in that building. And so ultimately the decision was people in that particular building got one level of benefit, and people on campus but outside the building got a different, lesser level of benefit. And so it's always trying to tailor it to what makes sense. And, and part of it's going to be, what can we prove? It might be that the circle is drawn around the Walmart parking lot. But even then, when we're trying to validate presence, that could be tricky. And so, but we work in conjunction with folks for that. But whatever we do, everyone's going to be involved in that conversation. Sir.
I had a question. Have you ever dealt with these types of situations where there's a tremendous amount of foreign nationals that are involved?
Oh yeah, absolutely. At Pulse nightclub, it was Hispanic night at the bar, and so we had a lot of undocumented people, a lot of people who only spoke Spanish, and I was sending money to people's family in the Dominican Republic. In Las Vegas, I think we had a lot of people who were there from Canada. I had to research what the intestacy laws were in Canada, and we had minor beneficiaries in Canada, and we had to work with Canadian lawyers about what do your laws say and what kind of trust do you need to protect these kids. So I haven't particularly done it with Mexico, but we've done it with other countries, and we know these are the questions we have that we're gonna have to figure out to make sure that everyone's treated fairly. Yes.
You mentioned a verification process in determining whether an individual was present at the time. Are police reports one way that you know of that
Yeah.
the police verify? And what do you do in a situation if you come across a client who managed to flee? I know we heard a story earlier where someone was able to get out of the Walmart and get into a vehicle and leave. How do you verify that?
Sure. So, like when we look to law enforcement records and we work with them, and so what we say is, if you're on the law enforcement list, you're set, you can go to the next phase. If you're not on the law enforcement list, that is not definitive. That just means we have to look for other ways to prove this. In Las Vegas, the FBI said, you know, we don't know all 20,000 people that were there, but we are absolutely certain that we have the names of everybody who was killed and anybody who was medically transported away from the scene. And then I talked with the folks at the Nevada Crime Victim Compensation Program, and they're like, she says, yeah, I've seen the list. About a third of the people are missing from the list. I had someone apply who had been shot and hospitalized for 5 days, wasn't on the list. So we know those lists are not infallible. If you are on the list, great. But then we look for other things. And so we might ask, hey, you're not on the list. Did you talk to anyone from law enforcement? If it's not too late to talk to someone from law enforcement, you might now want to talk to someone from law enforcement. If you were just coming out of the Walmart and you bought something, do you have a receipt that shows that you were at Walmart around that time? Did you post something on social media? Do you have contemporaneous text messages to your family about what's going on, or are they safe? And we have looked at all of those types of things, and we are open to what people have. We have to do something to be fair, to validate. And so if they don't have anything that shows that they were there, they don't have anybody that they were there with that we validated, that would vouch, or anything like that, then we might not be able to cover it. So we just we've got to try and find something. But we're pretty open to what that is and what they have to offer to validate that. So while we're talking about validation, for medical injuries, even though it's not based on any of their economic loss, we do use number of nights hospitalized as a rough measure of how bad it was. And so there might be some tiering based on, we'll get the applications, and we want to know, were they hospitalized overnight? How long? And with the application, they submit a HIPAA authorization. We'll work with is it 2 or 3 hospitals that we're primarily taking folks? And we work with them. They're part of that electronic validation process because it's really streamlined. So there's a workflow. Once they get validated for presence, if they said, I went to University Medical Center, then University Medical Center gets an email, you've got an application to review. They log into our system, they look at what's in their workflow, they look at the individual application, they can download a copy of the HIPAA authorization for their records, they look at what the applicant said, and they can say, yep, that is correct. They can say it is confirmed. They can say there's a conflict. And sometimes, when hospitals say that someone was admitted and when they went to the emergency room is not the same time. And so there might be a date difference or something. We'll work through that. Or the hospital might say, we don't have any record of this person. If they don't have any record, we might go back and say, are you sure that's the hospital you were at? Do you have any other information? And so they will validate that for being present. And based on the information we get from the applications, there might be a tiering of benefits that people who are hospitalized 1 to 2 nights would get this much, people who are hospitalized 3 to 7 nights would get this much, and so on. And we don't know that until we look at those applications.
Do you want to say something about gift versus compensation and how these...
Yeah, so we make a point that this is a gift. This is charity. This is not anything that anybody has a legal right to. When you're a crime victim, you have a legal right to get crime victim compensation. If someone is convicted of the crime, you have a legal right to get restitution. If someone was negligent and that contributed to your injuries, and if someone sold this guy a gun and they weren't supposed to, or something like that, they have a legal right to file a civil lawsuit. None of that matters to us. This is just a gift. And that's why we treat everybody the same. And if your grandmother gives you $20 and then gives your brother $10, your brother can't sue your grandmother and say, well, you gave her more instead. And so it's like, it's a gift. And so we try to be fair and transparent. People in the same situation will get the same amount of money. We are not going to do, make any distinction at all in where someone lives or what their immigration status is or whether they had a GoFundMe or not, because it's going down a rabbit hole that you just can't account for everything. Sure, someone had a GoFundMe and you can see that online, but I don't know what someone got from their church or their neighbors. And so it's really hard to do that, and we don't want to spend our time adjudicating claims. We just want to make sure we help victims and do it in a way that's as fair and transparent as possible.
I'll add one more thing, Jim. So the value, I think, from Paso in working with Jeff and the National Compassion Fund, you can see there's tons of experience, and there's no need for us to reinvent the wheel on this. The other really important thing, at least for me, is knowing at the end of this process that part of what they will do is an independent third-party audit. So we will have available and public information and audit of what monies came in and how it went. And so I'm hoping that will also help people feel good and watch this movie without, someone's taking a giant vacation to the Bahamas with this money. That's not the case at all. So there is that additional component.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.